Well, how have you enjoyed our conference so far? This has been an amazing, we're only at the beginning of day 2, and it seems like we've been together for a month already. It was a wonderful day yesterday, and I'd like to express thanks to the Career Mentoring Committee for a great event last early evening, and Terry for her choice of a wonderful restaurant last night, which almost all of us really loved, Betsy. And it was a great evening, and I'm happy to have everybody gathered this morning. As you all know, our theme for this conference is staying grounded in a turbulent world. And I know that I might be the only person in the world who's suffering from any turbulence, but has anybody else in this room experienced a little bit of turbulence in their lives? When we were talking about this theme back in April, in terms of whether we were going to do this program this time, it was an interesting conversation because some people thought, oh, by November things are going to be fine and there's not going to be any more turbulence. And some of us were thinking, are you crazy? It is going to be turbulent for a while. And in fact, that is the watchword for the next months and probably several years ahead, is functioning, maybe not in turbulence, but certainly in uncertainty. And many of us are fine making decisions and going about our day-to-day lives when we have some sense of what's going on. But with a constant sense of uncertainty, it's something that's very challenging. So as a result of that, we've put together an awesome panel of experts who are going to talk about a variety of aspects of staying grounded in a turbulent world. And I'm going to begin the introductions to my far right with Jamie Kramer, who is the managing director of JP Morgan. She has worked there for 15 years in the investment area. And speaking of staying grounded in a turbulent world, being in the banking industry over the last few years, you could be our poster person in terms of a success story. Jamie is currently the global head of due diligence for the JP Morgan Private Bank, Private Wealth Management, and Bear Private Client Services. In her current role, she runs a team of 20 research analysts located in New York, London, and Sao Paulo. Her team is responsible for the selection and ongoing supervision of both external and proprietary asset managers across equities and fixed income, totaling more than $100 billion in discretionary client assets. Prior to assuming this role, she was a portfolio manager for high net worth individuals, endowments, and foundations, with assets under her discretion exceeding $1 billion. She began her career at JP Morgan Investment Management, where she was a member of the equity team for institutional clients. She received a BA in economics from the University of Pennsylvania and her MBA from Wharton, and is a CFA charter holder. Wow. Before I continue the introductions, I was going to suggest, Margie, would you like to raise a little money for TCPW? Never. Okay. I'm going to ask everybody to silence their cell phones, and if a cell phone goes off, $20 donation to TCPW today.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
My pleasure. We might as well make it for the good of, and by the way, that doesn't really mean that everybody turn on your phones. That's, if you feel like you would like to make a donation to TCPW in any case, I'm sure that Margie will take your check. See, I knew this. Okay, our second panelist is Dr. Nancy Hanrahan, who is the, and I should have asked you this ahead of time so I could get the pronunciation correct, the Dr. Lenore H. Kurlowitz Memorial Term Assistant Professor in Psychiatric Mental Health Nursing. Whew. Dr. Hanrahan is a national leader in psychiatric mental health nursing and known for her work documenting the psychiatric nurse workforce and her expertise in system-level mental health service research. She's currently a faculty member for the Center for Health Outcomes and Policy Research at Penn School of Nursing. She is also a senior fellow of the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics at Penn. She is involved with state and national policy initiatives such as parity, quality indicators, creating a web-based advanced practice psychiatric nurse employment guide, and reviewing RUC, would that be RUC or RUC? RUC codes for reimbursement. Dr. Hanrahan's research involves examining the extent to which organizational traits of patient care environments and nursing staffing are associated with patient outcomes. Ultimately, she envisions her program of research contributing to defining optimal healing environments for people who need mental health care and the staff who work in these environments. And probably the most important thing to mention about Dr. Hanrahan is that she just had her third grandchild a week ago and had the pleasure of spending the week in California with her daughter and this new grandbaby, and flew back to be with us. So, and I'd also like to thank Sarah for introducing us to Dr. Hanrahan, Sarah being a graduate of the nursing school. And our next panelist is Reed Goldstein. And Dr. Goldstein is the Associate Director for Adult Treatment Inpatient Services at Pennsylvania Hospital. Among his many responsibilities, he has administrative duties, coordination of overall care, and the treatment of acutely ill psychiatric and neuropsychiatric inpatients. He is a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at Penn School of Medicine and an adjunct of the Pennsylvania Hospital professional staff in the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Goldstein has been the staff psychologist at Pennsylvania Hospital for nearly 2 decades, where he administers and interprets numerous tests to inpatients and outpatients, supervises psychotherapy interns, residents, and other staff members. He has delivered hundreds of papers, and I can attest to this because I looked through the titles of all of them, at various professional conferences and universities. He has received the Dean's Award for Excellence in Medical Student Teaching by an allied professional from Penn School of Medicine in 2003 and was the invited commencement speaker for Pennsylvania Hospital's psychology intern classes of 2002 and 2006. And last but not least, to my near right is Dr. Betsy Schur Levy. Betsy is a licensed clinical psychologist. She has a private practice in psychotherapy in New York City, where she has worked with children, adolescents, adults, and couples for over 20 years. Dr. Schur Levy has an expertise in working with depression and mood disorders, self-esteem issues, anxiety disorders, child and adolescent development, marital and family issues, adoption, and reproductive infertility. She received her undergraduate degree in psychology from Penn and her master's and doctorate from Columbia in psychology. Dr. Schur Levy pursued extensive clinical training at Montefiore Medical Center, Bellevue Hospital, and Mount Sinai Hospitals in New York City, where she worked with children, adolescents, and adults in the course of her psychodiagnostic and psychotherapeutic training. She was an adjunct professor of clinical psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University, and has been the school psychologist at the 92nd Street Nursery School for over a decade. Dr. Schur Levy is a longtime board member of the Mount Sinai Children's Center Foundation, and I think, as most of us know, she's on the board of overseers at SP Squared here at Penn, and a valued TCPW member. And of course, if anybody doesn't know this, she is featured as
you can't say
in the
this.
November issue of More Magazine, More Magazine.
You did not hear this.
Page 104, where you can see her modeling. Yes, that's right. That's what I should have had up on the screen. So, so if you didn't see the photograph of her modeling that beautiful coat, I'm sure that there's an issue of More Magazine floating around here someplace. So, anyway, the credentials of this panel are just awesome. And the credentials in this room are awesome as well. So together, I think we can come up with some ideas for how we can stay grounded in a turbulent world. And what we're going to do, just to give you the lay of the land for today, I'm going to start off with one question that I'm going to ask each of the panelists, and then we're going to have dialogue. And there will be times where we'll have dialogue amongst each other in the audience, but there will be dialogue amongst the panelists as well. And if you have a question or an idea that comes into your mind while we are going through some of this conversation, jot it down so that you can feel free to jump in and ask. And I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, what do you think people need to know about staying grounded from your perspective? And I'm going to start with, I should have flipped a coin here, but I'm going to start with Betsy.
Okay. Turbulent times, staying grounded, means something different to all of us. But in fact, there are certainly some common themes. Just this morning on my way here, I bumped into a few people and we were speaking about turbulent times. And it was fascinating how everyone's response was very similar. They responded with a little bit of laughter and a little bit of fear. Sort of, yes, this is incredible, but how do we proceed? I think the key is that during turbulent times, we lose a sense of predictability. Our plans for who we are, what we are, and how we'll proceed in the future, or how our family and colleagues and peers will proceed, have to be modified. So when predictability, which we don't always get in life, but we certainly search for, is compromised, you then see a feeling of a lack of internal control. And without your feeling of control, you're further compromised. What do? The lack of control defines turbulent times. You need to assess your own personality at this point. Are you someone who likes to remain very stable, very steady during turbulent times? You keep things as they are, put your best foot forward, assess your strengths, and keep on going. Keep your family intact, your job as intact as possible, and you sort of ride the tide. Others of us need to be far more active when we lose a sense of control and we're threatened by the unpredictability of the future. We need to get out there and feel like we're doing something, protecting ourselves, modifying the environment, being very active. So at this point, I would say assess your strengths, assess your coping mechanisms, and then go with them and use them and proceed as best as you can.
Bree?
Well, first off, thank you for inviting me and allowing me to participate. I guess the key word for me in this topic would be resiliency. And remembering my experiences as an example, when I was in graduate school, I was the only male in my class. And here today, I'm to be the only male. So hopefully I've learned a little bit over the years. So turbulence or stress, I guess one important thing to perhaps consider is that when people use the word anxiety, usually they're referring to a feeling that comes about because of what they're expecting to happen, like an apprehension about something in the future. How will my kid do in school? What's going to happen to my, IRA savings, things like that. Whereas another kind of turbulence, depression, for example, is more like a reaction that someone has to something in the past or that's already occurred. So when I think about turbulence and staying grounded in today's world, it occurs to me, like using the economic crisis as an example, that we're struggling with both kinds of turbulence. That there's, many people have actually experienced literally a loss of savings, of security, of predictability. But because things are unpredictable, as we just heard, there's also a great deal of apprehension about the future. And so it's sort of like a double whammy, if you will. And then I was encouraged by Lisa to think of a gem, because my understanding is that everyone likes to leave here with like a strategy. So I can elaborate when we get to it, but the key word for me would be resiliency in sort of maintaining a posture through these turbulent times.
Great. Thank you. Nancy?
Yes, hello. It's very nice to come today, meet all you wonderful women. Perhaps a key or a jewel for me has been my women friends. It's been really a delicious part of my entire life as I've gone along. But staying grounded in turbulent times, I think for me and for many people that I know, we have to figure out how to measure where we are. I think you mentioned that, both of you. And stress is a normal phenomena in life. And we all handle it, we all deal with it. And measuring how we respond to it is a very important aspect of how we will then deal with it, how we learn to deal with stress. So, and in fact, stress is necessary in order to survive. Stress on our body, we have to have exercise in order for our bodies to manage through gravity. But emotionally and spiritually, psychologically, I think that's probably what we're really dealing with today is from that perspective. And I'd say measuring your capacity or your style for dealing with stress is really important so that you know when you are in distress versus eustress. And eustress is normal. It's normal to have stress. In fact, if we didn't have it, our lives would be pretty doggone boring. Eustress means that there's some natural stress that's occurring in our life. Like my flying back from California and leaving my 2-week-old granddaughter was stressful, but it was a nice stress being there and having that happen in my life. Distress can be really also from on a continuum from, we all need to be stirred up in our lives to some degree. But there is a persistent distress that causes physical harm. And I would say, again, just for, keeping with a very specific answer to the question, that measuring and understanding how we deal with stress, what our natural inclination is to deal with stress, is critically important to how you manage yourself and stay grounded in this world. If you know that, if you know how well you do or don't cope, that will serve you well, because then you can make some choices about how you deal with that. And if it's eustress, you just carry on and you realize that that's just the way life goes. If it's distress, then there are other things that you need to really engage in and think about.
Thank you. Jamie.
Wow, some good advice. So I'm going to come at it from a financial perspective, but I am in a world where there never is predictability. When I started in 1993, you hear financial analysts say that the equity market will expected return is about 8% per year. It always has been that way. I've been in it now for 15 years. I don't think it's ever been 8%. I have been, and now, up, down 40, up 60. It's just predictability and stress, and you can see it. But interestingly enough, my comments are very similar. So in a time of turbulence, which we've clearly gone through, and I don't think it's over because of all the financial engineering that's occurred to get our economy stabilized, you need to reassess your own financial needs. You need to reassess how you deal with volatility personally. You need to know yourself. You need to know what makes you stressed in terms of your own financial situation. You need to know your tolerance for volatility. And you need to know what keeps you up at night. If you're someone who's glued to CNBC, and you really trust me because we know, and there's some of us in the room who work in the financial industry, don't believe everything you hear. It's just an opinion. And sometimes if you're in the industry, your jaw drops when you hear it. But if you're someone like my mother, my mother should not be in one stock because she just cannot tolerate losing $1. At any point in time, you need to know how you react to that. A lot of individuals in their own mind will separate their pools of assets, and that will help them. This is my stay rich money. Here's money that the time horizon, match your time horizon. If you're paying for a child's college or your grandchildren's college, you have a longer time horizon. You have a longer time to have that volatility or stress come to pass. If we look at the markets, we've had a tech bubble, we've had then a credit bubble, and if you've invested in the stock market over the last 10 years, you put $1 in 10 years ago, you'd really just be flat. So all that volatility for nothing. But you really need to understand yourself, what the pools of assets are for, how you're going to feel about it, obviously money causes a lot of stress, but it really does, if you can minimize that by understanding what your investments are and what you can tolerate. So again, take a step back, think about yourself. Everyone's different. Everyone in this room will have a different ability to tolerate volatility, and just understand and take a fresh look at where your pools of assets are and how they're invested.
Jamie, just a follow-on question to that. I know there are a lot of people in the room who have the specific financial expertise, but a lot of us don't have that. And who would you advise talking to get a comfort level around these issues?
Well, it's whether you have a financial advisor, it's the same for me as a professional mental advisor, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. For each of you, you'll have a different comfort with a different individual. So the most important thing with your advisor is, do you trust them? Have they been there for you when your investments have gone down? Do you have an advisor who's just calling you and telling you all the rosy pictures, or are they talking to you and kind of helping you? A financial advisor is like a psychological advisor, and really, do you trust them at the end of the day? So there's lots of advisors who can help you. You can also help yourself with the internet. You can go on, and if someone asks, if you have an investment in your portfolio, you can go to Investopedia and type in what will happen to my fixed income portfolio if rates go up, or there's all sorts of questions you can ask. But you really need to trust your advisor. You need to understand how they get paid, because that's important, because there's different motivations, how they get paid. And if you don't feel comfortable with advice they're giving, then you should really switch. And the other advice I'd give is you should 100% understand every single investment that you have. What is the driver? Not just, and again, back to the past versus the future, we all know what's happened to our investments. And every time there's a crisis, something different causes it. So one of the things that I think people are going to potentially get themselves into is, if you think your assets are safe, you should ask your advisor, under what environment would these assets go down? Even if they're fixed income assets, because there are clear risks. And the other thing is, there's no such thing as a free lunch. We all know that. So if you're getting too much yield from a fixed income portfolio, you might want to question what the risks are. But you just need to understand you understand what's happened in the past. But I would try to say, what are the key drivers of my future returns for this portfolio? And make sure you understand it and you feel comfortable with the person who you're asking. You should always be able to ask any question about anything in your portfolio.
Thank you. This topic about the past and the future has come up a couple of times, and I liked the way Reed set it up by talking in terms of anxiety is something we're fearful of that's going to happen in the future, and depression is really, or I'm paraphrasing of course, something that is an outcome from something that happened in the past. And I think that during turbulent times, when we're not conscious about our thought process, we blend together the past, the present, and the future, and don't really have a grasp on what is going on. So I'd like just to throw the question out to the panel. What can people do to separate their personal timelines? How do you segregate your personal timeline so that you can manage stress more effectively?
It's a very turbulent, inducing question.
We like to be provocative here. What could we do? What can we do if we are feeling anxiety about something happening in the future, what can we do to get grounded to prevent that from getting out of control?
Sure. This takes us back to the issue we were just discussing earlier, which is knowing yourself, of course, and being resilient. Whether it's friends that help you move forward, or colleagues, or peers, or daily exercise, or a cooking class, or a book group, or being with your children more, whatever it is. But there's a very important component that I think we discussed a bit before the panel in terms of when you're facing an unpredictable time in the future. And if this is causing an increase in symptomatology, depression, anxiety, mood changes, irritability, be very, very careful about what you're projecting out into the environment as you're unsure of your future, because you may easily slip into that role of feeling inadequate or feeling insecure. And you don't want to project a lack of self-confidence into your environment, whether it be at home with your family or more poignantly for us every day at work. You do not want to project those feelings of inadequacy and, again, insecurity, because they will be immediately eaten up by the people around you. And if they detect your sense of vulnerability and volatility, you won't look sort of stable on your feet and, quote, no pun intended, grounded during this period. And I think that's how you can protect yourself going forward from this great period of instability. Try to project, if you can, some sense of stability and self-confidence and self-esteem and resilience. You can go forward in a changing time.
How do you do that? How do you take something, how do you grab onto something to give you that grounding so that you can project that confidence? How do you find one thing to anchor on?
You know, I started with talking about measures, or really creating some kind of point at which you understand, as you said, know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There are circumstances in all of our lives where we experience really extremely stressful events. And they just happen to all of us. And during those events, it's very interesting to me. There's been a lot of research recently about brain and behavior. And a recent 2009 article by a psychologist that I'm just sorry that I cannot pull the name up out of my head, but who has been doing studies about using imaging and testing stress responses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me, research sometimes just really validates what we already know.
Clinically.
And in her research, what she found out is that we've known for some time that fight or flight responses happens in the amygdala and the hippocampus of our brains. And the hippocampus, it's actually literally in these parts of our brains. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that kind of filters the external environment in, and the amygdala does a lot of tempering, managing and sorting. Well, when we're experiencing a particularly stressful event in our lives, like when the market crashed, for instance, or if somebody dies in our family, or if there's your relationship is falling apart, or your child is not doing well in school.
Or you lose your job.
Or you lose your job. Those are very distinctly stressful events in our lives. And, or you lose your health. That can be extremely stressful. And then you go into the hospital, or you get into the healthcare system, and then you get really stressed.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so what happens in our brains, though, and this is something that really helps me to kind of put some thoughtfulness about this and some measuredness about it, is that normally when we're in normal stress, what happens is what kicks in first for us is our frontal lobe. Our frontal region of the brain is the part of our brain that organizes and plans and thinks through things and can really sort and deliver for us as we can learn and assimilate, synthesize. But when we're under extreme stress, what happens is that the frontal lobe shuts off, and we just are responding from our limbic system. And those are times that we do not want to make decisions, because we have a shut down frontal lobe, which does all our planning and our organizing and our thinking through and our processing. And we want to wait until we've gotten some little bit of time and temperance on what is going on. And that is, I think, a really important period of time. You don't want to be making decisions during that time. You don't want to be saying, this relationship, that's it. You don't want to be saying my kid is just a mess and a failure and that's all there is to it. As you said, you don't want to go out into the world just feeling like you're worthless and you can't do anything. You don't want to make decisions about who you are and your capacity and your ability to handle the world during those times, because you can think to yourself, okay, I'm responding from my limbic system, from my amygdala, my hippocampus, and my frontal lobe is shut down.
Just think about that.
And so, that's a way to think about that. And then you start to get some distance from the stress, and you can start seeing your frontal lobe wake up again, and you can start thinking through things and planning things and really managing better. And you know yourself, you know how that happens. You also know that during that frontal lobe shutdown, you already have systems in place that really help you to manage the stress. You've got a friend, you've got family, you do yoga, you do all of these wonderful things. And Jamie and I were just talking, I've had a therapist all my life. I love my therapist. And it's not because I'm in turbulence all the time. It's because I know there are times that I have to go see somebody like Betsy or Rick because I need to externalize, and I don't need to be...
We go to each other.
Oh, you do? I don't need to be dumping that on my intimate partner, and the first sign that I'm doing that is I get irritable.
Right.
And I start to show up with that person, and they're looking at me a little askew, but I know it, that I'm dumping on them, and I can be just fine out here in the world. I can really put on a good face. But when I'm home, that's when I know that my frontal lobe's shutting down. And I need to engage all my support systems in whatever fashion they are for you, and they're individual. And what often happens, though, is because our frontal lobes are shut down, we don't engage in them because we don't think to do that. We can't plan ahead. But so that's where you can have really a solid plan in place, an advanced directive that when my frontal lobe shuts down, that's when I take a bath with candles. That's when I call my friend. That's when I go off for the weekend, or whatever it is that you have to do.
Sometimes the best plans aside, people sabotage themselves. So what can we do to prevent that sabotage from happening? Reed, would you like to kick that off?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, first off, I think it's okay to give yourself permission to not feel well when you experience turbulence. There's everyone always seems to have this momentum and emphasis to not want to, to only want to feel good. And so, on the one hand, I think it's great to take a second, catch your breath, and acknowledge or confirm or, trust yourself that you're not feeling well. Anxious, upset, confused, frustrated. But just at that point where it begins to immobilize you, that would be the time to shift to the other side of the coin, which is to not forget that when people do feel uncomfortable or stuck, that's also in and of itself another opportunity. And so, maybe what you might typically do in your day-to-day professional life, which is, to create success out of failure, maybe there's an opportunity when people are feeling upset to understand that that's also a time to not get trapped into thinking there's no new opportunities awaiting you. And so people are more likely to sabotage themselves when they stay stuck, when they don't trust or go out and prove that being uncomfortable is an opportunity in and of itself to change and redefine or recreate.
Betsy?
Yeah, I think we've talked a bit amongst ourselves this morning about these issues, and we talked a little earlier about not projecting too clearly to the external world, your family, your colleagues, your friends, your coworkers, this sense of vulnerability and inadequacy for fear that it will shake you more, shake them more. And you know the old saying, and I think it's very poignant this morning, confidence is contagious. And what I mean by confidence is contagious is that during turbulent, very stressful times, everyone's feeling vulnerable. And if you can just help yourself to find that place of self-esteem and not be in the least bit arrogant, but face that we're all going through vulnerable periods, and where are these threads of our confidence? How can we share them with one another? The key here, I think, is not to isolate. Many people, when they're very threatened and very vulnerable, and there isn't the same predictability in the future, whether it's in your family or in your work life, we tend to isolate. And isolation from those we love, from those that we have empathic relationships with, and I mean genuinely empathic relationships with, and hopefully your coworkers are a part of that group, not just family and friends. But isolation can breed that kind of loneliness and depression that during these turbulent times will not help. So reaching out to those who help you feel grounded, even if it's, as Reed said, to acknowledge that you're not feeling at the top of your game. You're not arrogant. These are difficult times. But to reach out to others, offer some sense of hope and confidence about going forward. Be a team player. Go forward as a team. Some people, as I said earlier, will respond stronger to the turbulence and the stress than others. You feed on one another, but try not to isolate. Try not to sort of slip into any defensive arrogance or excessively defensive self-confidence. I guess moderation is really the key to what we're talking about. And again, if you can, try to execute good judgment as you did before those more vulnerable days. Judgment's key. We all know when our judgment is on and when our judgment's off. Much like you're saying when you walk in the front door at home and you lose that connection to your frontal lobe functioning and your judgment all of a sudden is off. You know, very important in these turbulent times. Assess your judgment. Yeah. Stay confident, not arrogant. Stay connected.
I guess one of the things that I'm hearing, and it makes a lot of sense, is those who have sabotaged themselves financially are those who make investment decisions when their frontal lobe is not working.
Right.
And so if you think about all the people who marched, I mean, we had billionaires who, in the beginning of the March, sold everything. They thought we were going to the Great Depression. Well, if you look at the facts, and there's a woman from the Fed here, we're pumping liquidity in. After the Great Depression, they actually tightened the monetary system. If you look at the facts and you stay grounded, and you don't go into panic mode, and you should definitely not make financial decisions in panic mode. All those people, I mean, these people lost millions of dollars by selling that. I guess what you have to do is step back and reassess the initial asset allocation or your initial game plan, and will this still work for me in the long run? But it's all making sense now. I guess to say to someone who comes in panicked, come back later, your frontal lobe, take a bath.
Yeah,
we have a lot of baths at J.P. Morgan.
I see.
Next time I go to my own practice, I'll have a bath.
Yeah, I see you at your next. I think there's going to be a little renovation in your office, and all of your advisors are going to go into this training to manage their frontal lobes so that they can help the clients.
Well, there are a lot of offices, a lot of financial people in New York have put in their, we don't have one, of course, Jamie Dimon went in and cut all costs and took it out, but a lot of them have gyms and have trainers coming in.
Absolutely.
So when you're stressed, you get on, but really don't make a decision when your frontal lobe isn't working financially, because you will regret it.
Yeah. I just want to pick up on something that was also thematic in terms of no isolation. Nancy, you mentioned your friends that are so important to you. I think that a lot of people do shut down and they do go into isolation when they're in that severe state. I always tell people that they should have 5 what I call 911 people. Mm-hmm. And these are people you can call when you're having an emergency. And the answer to why you want 5 is because you might get 4 voicemails. And so the idea is, and this isn't about texting, it's not about email, this is about human contact. And I think it's really important. I think it's one of the things that people do to sabotage themselves is they go, as I call it, they go underground, they disappear, and they don't allow themselves to have their support system take care of them. So I just want to jump on that with everybody else. So what do we do to prevent? What do we do to take the steps just on a daily basis? Forget, we don't know what kind of turbulence we're going to have in a given day, but the turbulence can come. We know that we might start off with the best of intentions, but what could we do at the beginning of our day to prepare ourselves and to get ourselves grounded so that during the day, if we do have a disorienting situation happen, we can get back to our center? What are some thoughts?
I think that it's important to remember that our experience in life is physiological, emotional, and spiritual. And if you look at the way most of us have set up our lives, we're naturally inclined to really create balances in all of those areas. And if you don't have balances in those areas, you pretty much know it. You're not eating well, or you stop eating, or you're losing weight, or you're gaining weight. You're not sleeping well, or you're sleeping too little, or you're sleeping too much, or your sleep is interrupted. You notice yourself, as you say, isolating, pulling away from people and keeping yourself, not making those calls or emails or whatever. Or and this is one that I think is really a key for me, is I notice when I'm personalizing things. So when somebody comes up to me that's freaking out or having a bad day and they project it on me.
That's exactly.
I feel
$20
worse.
for TCPW.
Excellent, I wasn't here.
40.
I don't, I find myself really taking it on as something, did I do something here? Did I say, something happened that I was responsible for? When in fact, it really is about that person. It's not about you at all. And that for me is a real key to knowing that I'm moving into a place where I need to gear in. And I think somebody over here says about prevention. This is what I think is about prevention, and everybody has their own ways of dealing with it, physiologically, emotionally, or spiritually. Church, or spiritual sustenance, physical exercise, really paying attention to what we eat, what we don't eat. Those are really maintenance preventive things. Now,
could I just ask a question? Or just to put a clarifying statement in. So what we need to do is we need to really identify what our trigger is. And you were saying that you notice that if you're starting to personalize things, that's a sign.
Right.
So I want everybody to be just thinking about that, because we're going to come back to this in a second. What is it that's your personal trigger that could get you into that frenzied state? Please.
and I want to take this opportunity because it's so often something that we don't want to talk about or deal with, and it's called mental illness. So it's about when we get to the point, and every one of us, 20% of the population, has an experience where they no longer feel it can be in control. They can't engage those preventive kinds of actions. And it may be genetic, that you're inclined to that. It might be that you've had this prolonged stress, that you just are weary, psychologically weary, and you've gotten out of balance. But what it looks like is, it looks like that every day, or it feels like you wake up and you just don't feel good about yourself. You don't have energy, you're not sleeping well, you don't concentrate as well, so you're kind of flitting from one thing to the next. You feel depressed, your mood is irritable, and you're just not feeling a lot of joy in life. And those are some of the early signs. But as people get more and more depressed, and I would bet in this room we all have somebody that either ourselves or others have experienced this, that where depression really gets such that you do isolate and life looks really dark and gloomy and you can't see beyond that. And some people even begin to feel like life isn't worth it, and that they start to internally be driving and thinking about driving into a tree, or, you know,
That's right.
there's sort of passive thoughts of, you know, hurting themselves, or, you know, just ending it. And that's an extreme. I want you to know I'm speaking extreme in this respect because we want to get the full spectrum. But if that's happening, it's so important to acknowledge it and to seek help for that, and not to delay seeking help. Get engaged in some therapy with someone early on. And how do you do that? Where do you find that person? I don't know, there's probably, everybody in this room knows of somebody that either has been in therapy or you have a therapist yourself. I've had a therapist my whole life. And sometimes, you know, I really needed that person because there is depression in my family. You know, there's a propensity for that. But, and so there have been times where I've really needed to look at that. But then the rest of the time, I just really find a little maintenance doesn't hurt me at all. In fact, I love seeing my therapist. It's good money well spent. So.
Okay. The key behind this last piece is to know what it is that is the thing for you, and then to figure out, and obviously we can't do that in 2 minutes, to figure out what to do about it to prevent you from getting into that high stress, difficult to deal with life mode. So I'll solicit 1 or 2 comments. Anybody want to contribute, or? Yes.
I think our group, you could sum it up in lack of self-care is a trigger. We said if you're hungry, some people are hungry, they're tired, they've said yes to too many things, just not being disciplined about taking care of ourselves.
Okay. Very good. Yes.
This is a sort of a related question, but you mentioned food. Are there certain foods that are triggers one way or another? That, you know,
Chocolate.
Yeah.
And we'll answer
Jane,
chocolate.
to alcohol or
Alcohol.
prescription drugs, if you're feeling
Well, that's a
stressed,
very
are there certain
important
foods
point.
that you eat, or vice versa, are there certain foods that will make you more stressed out? Caffeine.
Caffeine, right. You know, we can cover that
Yeah,
in
you
the
know something, Jane, I think
gems.
that that could be something that you could ask at lunchtime today too.
Right.
Because
Because it's
no,
Dr.
no,
Rosin's-
because
It's his
because our
expertise.
speaker today,
Yes.
it's a segue because that's his research
That's his thing.
expertise. So it'll be the front and center question. Yes.
It brings up an important point.
Can I ask a question? I mean, this is, I know it's a sum up, but I think it's well, I just want to ask this question. So
Go for it. Go for it.
stand up and is resiliency. You mentioned resiliency. Is that something that's genetic? Are some people better able? Is that a thing we're born with, or can you learn it?
Should I answer now?
Yes.
You know, certainly there are some styles that people have that are traits, like how extroverted or introverted someone is thought to be more of a fixed, stable trait. But when I was reading over some notes for today, I was reminded that resiliency actually is not a trait, that it's something that can be taught or can evolve over time. And if this would be, I mean, I could talk a little bit more about resiliency now, or wait.
Yeah, this is actually a great segue. As promised, I wanted each of our panelists to give you a gem that you can take away to be able to apply. So do continue.
I have to just digress and have 2 or 3 other random thoughts. Number 1, as great as taking a bath with candles is alone, it's also good to do it with your partner. That would be in the same category as yoga or exercise, okay? Secondly, my guess is the rates of depression drop during the week of Halloween because
Chocolate.
I have no idea if this is actually a fact, but chocolate's a good antidepressant. Thirdly, this may...
Write that twice,
Yeah,
Margie.
This may not be preaching to the choir, but people who tend to be resilient and are struggling in the financial difficulties tend to be people whose self-esteem or self-worth is not totally reliant upon how much money they're earning. So on the one hand, you know, we sort of want a good education, we want the best for our kids, we want status, we want to work well, we want to have comfort. But in addition to those things, it seems to be the people whose identity can be broader than just limited to the dollar amount or the, you know, that seem to be slightly more resilient or slightly happier, more stable during these times. Okay, and then there's the issue of resiliency itself, right? So I'm not resilient enough to remember all 10 aspects of resiliency, but this actually, it ends up as summarizing some of what the other folks have already said, but so making connections with family and friends, activities, faith-based organizations, avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. You can't change that there's an economic crisis, but perhaps you can change how you interpret and respond to these events. Accept that change is part of living. Try to move toward your goals, be realistic, don't focus on the unachievable, more like wake up each morning and say, what can I accomplish today? Not in the type A, have to win at all costs way of questioning, but more like what's reasonable for the goal for today, you know, for personal health, for comfort level. Take decisive actions, you know, don't detach, don't wish the stress would go away, but take meaningful, tangible, concrete steps to reduce stress. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. It's possible to further one's sense of self-worth, even when feeling vulnerable, rather than lament that the 3-month cruise cannot happen this particular fiscal year. Perhaps, you know, go to the gym with your kids and start working out with them. The dog situation you were talking about before, pets. Nurture a positive view of yourself. Place a stressful situation in a broader context and try and keep long-term perspective. You know, strike while the iron's cold, not while the iron's hot.
That's right.
To summarize what you said earlier. Maintain a hopeful outlook. You know, perhaps visualize what you want rather than worry about what you fear. I went to college in Philadelphia, and at that time the Big Five basketball was very active and vibrant, right here at the Palestra. And I remember the coach of LaSalle at that time, who then went on to coach the Lakers at one point, not only quoted Shakespeare, supposedly, in the locker room before the games, but would actually have his players visualize making the first shot. And so even when, like, the weaker teams would play the stronger teams, he would have them visualize, you know, the success for today, the opening winning round. And of course, take care of yourself, pay attention to your own needs, exercise, you know, identify what works well for you as a part of your own personal strategy in order to foster resilience.
Great. Jamie?
Mine are fairly shallow.
No, and number 11 is don't self-judge.
Yeah. So, my mother had this thing on the refrigerator that said make lemonade from lemons. So
Right.
it's the same. So I'm going to tell you a few financial but I like the be hopeful. I mean, if you're watching TV, CNBC, and everyone's talking about doom and gloom, turn it off. It's not going to do you any good. Okay, so what can you do?
Turn on the Food Network.
Yeah, turn on the Food Network. Right, or to go do yoga. So, you know, we've already come back. You know, if you had $100 last year, you were down 40. You're back up if you didn't use your frontal lobe to panic. You're back up, but you're still down. So, different things that you can do. If you have losses, with the exception of the state of New Jersey, those losses should be harvested. There are other investments you can go into because they have financial value going forward. Okay, so that's a positive. For every, you know, with taxes going up, for every dollar that you've lost, if you can harvest it and go into, not be out of the market, but ask your advisor to go into a very similar investment for 31 days, you can harvest those losses. Those losses have value against future future gains. Okay, so that's one. One, if you have good credit, interest rates are probably at the lowest levels they will be. While jumbos are not easy to get, you can get them. And you might want to think about refinancing if you have a good loan to value on your home, because you're locking in good rates. And I think the consensus is not soon, but in the future, inflationary and interest rates will be higher. So you could do that. You could find a good money manager that has reopened, because they're finding lots of values in the market. So there's a lot of very well-known money managers who now have capacity. So you could do that. You could reassess yourself and try to understand your investments. And I would say look forward rather than backward. So if you, because what usually happens in the market is people look backward and then they tend to chase the good performance, and that's the past. You can't get that. So you need to figure out what's going to be good performance going forward. So don't chase performance. And there's a lot of interesting estate planning opportunities for those who haven't gotten hurt that badly. Because of low interest rates and low valued assets, talk to your advisor about maybe setting a grant or annuity trust where you can put in a low valued asset at a low interest rate and pass it along to your children. And again, with taxes probably going higher, you might want to talk to your advisor about how to structure your assets in the most effective way.
Great.
So those are my financial comments.
Thank
Be
you.
hopeful.
Be
I like
hopeful.
that.
Yes. Betsy.
That the market's going to.
We've really covered, I think, some very critical psychological variables that help you stay grounded in turbulent times. I think we've been very consistent talking about, confidence, self-control, assessing where you are, assessing your strength, remaining empathically connected to those around you, which is so critical, not isolating, etc. But I want to emphasize that it is during these vulnerable periods that these are not easy tasks. I mean, certainly they're critical, every single one of them, from securing your self-esteem to not being isolated, to going to yoga class, to projecting a positive attitude at work, to really sensitively reading the needs of your children and friends and colleagues and spouse, etc. This is what makes up every day for all of us. But it's when we have no predictability and we have no certainty, and our friends are equally depressed and worried, and they're calling us for help, and we don't want to burden others. It's during these periods of crisis, financial crisis, psychosocial crisis, that it's not always easy to access these ego strengths. And these are ego strengths, from judgment all the way down to relationships, all the way down to Freud, to love and to work, to be a good partner, to be productive at work. It's during these periods we can't always have access to our more resilient parts of ourselves. It's there where I really recommend that you look for a more objective connection, because we're talking subjectively now from the inner self. The beauty of intervention, and I'm not talking about just expensive one-on-one psychotherapy, but the many clinics throughout these particularly urban environments, through institutes and hospitals that offer services, family services, couple services, individual psychotherapy at sliding scales for your family, where you can objectively talk to someone about, my mood in the morning is different. I don't approach work the same way. I'm not taking the same self-confidence with me. My ego package is compromised. An objective person is vital at that point. And it does something else. You're making a relationship. And the empathic connection with what is an objective observer is vital. So it doesn't mean you have to have the large dollar for individual psychotherapy every Thursday at 5:45, although that's what keeps us going. There are many ways, many ways to access help. Sometimes it's from your book group or your cooking club. Or the peers, the other parents in your children's class. People have been out where they're networking how to get themselves help. Listen, don't be too arrogant. There's many ways to get help. You know, it's not the letters after someone's name, masters of social work, psychologists, psychiatrists, nursing, banking specialists. It's who you can connect with in the world that helps you put that strong package of your personal ego back in shape. And that's my recommendation.
Nancy?
Well, I'm going to stay on track around science, because I love science. And there's another really interesting scientific development that is relatively new, and that is that our brain cells can generate. We used to think that what you had when you were 17 was what you were going to get for the rest of your life. But science has discovered that that's not true. In fact, we can neurogenerate. So what that says to me is that we can learn how to handle our lives and the stress is in our lives and the resilience that we need in order to deal with the stresses that we all have. Nobody's without them. And so when you come up against another stressful event, just remember that, okay, I can develop those neurons in my brain to help me deal with the stress that I have in my life.
Wow. Whew. I'm going to tell you, this has been,
I need chocolate.
yeah, everybody, we'll forget our lunch, we're just going to go for
With
chocolate.
the masks, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know.
Forget those luggage tags.
I know that I speak for everybody here to say that this has been a most informative panel, and I don't even know where to start. I'll start with neurogeneration because I want to be able to say that I neurogenerate. So, and I want to know, can you neurogenerate your frontal lobe so that it gets bigger? That's something that I want to look into a little bit more. I want to remind everybody that confidence is contagious. I want to remind everybody to reassess. Sometimes we need to reassess pretty frequently, but to reassess where we are and to measure and to know that, okay, we've got to step back, take some time. Everybody needs to remember that chocolate is a good antidepressant. And I love the concept of striking while the iron is cold. And to bring it back to us as a council, the Trustees Council of Penn Women is a place where a lot of connections, non-neural but otherwise, are made. And this is a continuing development of our council in order to get those connections amongst each other. And I think that we've done a lot of that over the last day, and I want to encourage everybody to continue that. So please join me in thanking our panel. And
Absolutely.
okay, thank you so much.